Alan Wake Remastered, Remedy's 2021 remaster of the ever so popular game that originally released in 2010. The original game quickly became a cult classic, and gamers all over the world rejoiced when the remaster was released in 2021. 2 years later, in the year 2023, how does Alan Wake Remastered fare? First, we need to define what exactly is a remaster versus a remake. Remaster involves taking the original game and updating its graphics through texture enhancements and the addition of model details. This would allow a game that originally ran at 720p on the Xbox 360 to run at 4K on the Xbox Series X, for example. A remaster does not have any gameplay changes, storyline changes, or game design changes. On the other hand, a remake builds the game up from ground zero with new graphics, new gameplay changes, possible story changes, and an overhaul of the UI. A good example of a remake is the Demon's Souls remake that released in 2020 and that was based on the original 2009 game. So why does this matter when discussing Alan Wake Remastered? To judge it fairly, we need to know whether the game is a remaster or a remake. This will affect how harshly we judge its graphics, gameplay, and game design categories. As we discussed earlier, a remaster only improves the graphical fidelity of the original game, but does not touch its gameplay or UI design. The graphical improvements of Alan Wake Remastered are incredibly noticed between the original and 2021 remaster. The Xbox 360 version ran at 544p and 30 frames per second, which by 2023 standards basically means it ran just slightly better than the output you'd get from running it on a toaster. The graphical limitations that the original game had were due exclusively to the capabilities of the Xbox 360 and not the developers. For the remaster, the Xbox Series X and PS5 target a 1440p resolution and 60 frames per second graphical mode. Not only has the game resolution drastically improved, but the frame rate has reached that buttery smooth key 60 frames per second. The developers were also able to dramatically improve lighting effects and shadows in the remaster that they could have only dreamed about in the original game. Improved character models allowed for hair and skin to take on more realistic interactions with light and shadows. The cutscenes, although improved and re-rendered compared to the original version, still only run at 30 frames per second. This makes for some incredibly jarring transitions between running and gunning through the woods at 60 frames per second to immediately watching backstory at 30 frames per second. As fantastic as the story is, the graphical fidelity of the cutscenes detracts from the overall experience of the remaster. Now that we've discussed the graphical improvements that the remaster offers, we can move on and talk about the gameplay, which is unchanged compared to the original. This is the gameplay that we all know and love from the original game 13 years ago. It involves Alan Wake, his flashlight, and some weapons. For those that are new to the game and don't know what that means, let me explain. The nightmare that Alan is living in involves many enemies that appear from the shadows. Shooting these enemies with bullets does not work, as they are invincible initially. The flashlight Alan carries appears to have a special interaction with these enemies, as shining it on the enemies will break their invulnerability shields and allow them to be killed by regular bullets or grenades. At its core, the gameplay loop is incredibly simple, but it is a perfect system for this game. Let's remember the character of Alan Wake is a simple writer. He does not have any professional training that allows him to fight like Bruce Lee. He was not trained by special forces to be able to shoot enemies and pick them off perfectly. He's just a regular Joe who has no idea what's going on in this nightmare around him. But he has figured out that the enemies don't like the light, and after enough of it, they are susceptible to bullets. This simple combat system allows you to never feel like you're invincible. You are made aware of your mortality from the very beginning of the game. You are just there to survive and make it to the next lamppost checkpoint. The game, including the 2 extra episodes, offers around 15 to 20 hours of gameplay. This is an appropriate length to tell Alan's story. The replayability is, however, on the lower side, as you can maybe try a second playthrough on a harder difficulty, but other than that, your experience will be very similar in future playthroughs. You're using the same guns, you're using the same flashlights, you're taking the same routes. Really nothing differs except for the difficulty. Now we can talk about the verdict. How does Alan Wake Remastered fare in 2023? Well, the game is starting to show its age a little bit, as it is a remaster of a 2010 game. As such, the core gameplay loop is 13 years old, and while it is incredibly fun, it's a bit outdated in today's modern horror game scene. The graphics are significantly improved over the original game, but even those at 1440p resolution and 60 frames per second are starting to fall behind today's standards of 4K 60 FPS. And yes, I know a lot of games are not able to output 4K 60 FPS even nowadays, but for me that's the bar to measure games up to. If games can't achieve that level of graphical fidelity, they essentially fail to meet the minimum bar for the year 2023. Overall, Alan Wake Remastered is worth your time in 2023 at the right price. For example, if it released today at $70 would it be worth it? Definitely not. But for $20, this is a hell of a fun experience that will allow new gamers to experience an awesome horror game and allow older gamers to take a trip down nostalgia lane. I highly recommend everybody playing Alan Wake Remastered in preparation for Alan Wake 2, which should release later in 2023. Guys, if you liked this review and you liked what you saw, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and I will catch you next time. Have a good one.